The slap echoed through the small roadside diner like a gunshot. It was sharp, sudden, violent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. A coffee cup slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. The low-country music playing in the background suddenly felt too loud, then somehow too quiet at the same time. Tasha Williams stood beside table 7, her hand pressed tightly against her cheek. The sting burned deep into her skin. Her ears rang. For a moment she couldn't even breathe. She had been balancing 2 plates and a fresh pot of coffee. It had been a busy lunch hour. Truckers at the counter, a family in the back booth, 2 elderly women sharing pie near the window, and Sheriff Dalton Reeves sitting alone at table 7. "I'm so sorry, sir," Tasha had said just seconds earlier. "It slipped. I didn't mean to spill it." A small splash of coffee had landed on his sleeve, not even enough to soak through. But to Sheriff Reeves, it was enough. "You think sorry fixes this?" he barked. Now she stood there frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. Sheriff Reeves was a tall, heavy-built man in his 50s. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished, his reputation darker than most people were willing to admit out loud. He leaned closer to her, his breath heavy with tobacco. "You need to watch what you're doing," he growled. I said I'm sorry," Tasha whispered again. Her fingers trembled against her cheek. The red mark was already forming. Across the diner, eyes darted back and forth, but no one spoke, because everyone knew. Sheriff Reeves didn't just enforce the law in this town, he controlled it. Tasha swallowed hard. She had dealt with rude customers before. She had dealt with insults, with sideways glances, with whispers she pretended not to hear. But this was different. This was public. This was power. Her manager, Carl, rushed from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "Sheriff, please," Carl said nervously. "She's one of our best workers. It was an accident." Reeves slowly turned his head toward Carl. "You defending her?" he asked quietly. "No, sir. I just meant—" "Then shut up," Reeves snapped. Carl's face went pale. He stepped back immediately. Tasha felt the tears building, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. She thought about her mother at home, resting in bed, too weak to work after months of medical treatments. She thought about the rent bill sitting on the kitchen table. She thought about how badly she needed this job. "I'll pay for the cleaning," she said softly. Reeves let out a slow, mocking laugh. "With what money?" he asked. "Tips?" A few uncomfortable chuckles came from a corner table, not because it was funny, but because fear makes people laugh at the wrong moments. Tasha felt smaller with every second. "I didn't mean any disrespect," she said, pleading. "Respect?" Reeves scoffed. "You don't even know what that word means." The words cut deeper than the slap. A man at the counter shifted in his seat. An elderly woman covered her mouth with her hand, but still no one stepped forward, because everyone had seen what happened to people who crossed Sheriff Reeves. Traffic tickets that turned into court dates, inspections that mysteriously failed, rumors that spread fast and stuck forever. Reeves leaned closer again. "You people always think you can get away with things," he said under his breath. The air in the diner grew heavy. Tasha's heart pounded. She had heard comments before, quiet ones, subtle ones, but never this open, never this bold. She wanted to speak. She wanted to say something strong, but fear wrapped around her throat like a tight rope. "I'm just trying to do my job," she whispered. Reeves stared at her for a long moment. Then he did it. He slapped her, hard. The sound cracked across the room. It bounced off the walls. It silenced everything. Tasha stumbled sideways, hitting the edge of a table. A plate slid off and shattered on the floor. A child in the back booth started crying. Her hand flew to her face. She felt heat, pain, embarrassment, but more than anything, humiliation. Reeves straightened his uniform slowly, as if he had simply brushed off dust. "Maybe that'll help you remember,"
he said coldly. No one moved, not the truckers, not the family, not even Carl, because the fear of one powerful man had frozen an entire room. Tasha's eyes filled with tears now. She couldn't stop them anymore. She hated that he could do this. She hated that nobody stopped him. She hated that part of her had expected it. Reeves picked up his coffee cup and examined the tiny stain on his sleeve. "This town needs discipline," he muttered. He reached into his pocket for cash, then paused. "No tip," he said flatly. As if that was the worst part of what he had done. Tasha stood there shaking. In that moment, she felt invisible, small, powerless. But something shifted. At the far corner booth, near the window where sunlight streamed in through dusty blinds, a chair slowly scraped against the floor. The sound was soft, but in that silent diner, it was louder than the slap. Heads turned. A tall man in a gray hoodie stood up calmly. He had been sitting alone, eating quietly, unnoticed, until now. He placed a few bills on the table beside his untouched coffee. His face showed no panic, no fear, only a controlled, steady calm. His eyes moved from Sheriff Reeves to Tasha's red, trembling face. And in that quiet moment, something changed in the air. The fear that once filled the room was no longer alone, because someone had finally decided to stand up.
The chair's legs scraped slowly across the floor as the tall man stepped away from his booth. Every eye in the diner followed him. He wasn't wearing a uniform, no badge, no symbol of authority, just a simple gray hoodie, dark jeans, and worn boots. But the way he walked, steady, controlled, balanced, made it clear he was not just another customer. Sheriff Dalton Reeves turned his head slightly. "Sit back down," Reeves ordered, without fully facing him. The man kept walking. Each step was unhurried, measured. He stopped a few feet away from Tasha, glancing at the red mark on her cheek. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. Then he looked directly at the sheriff. "Sheriff," he said quietly. Reeves finally turned fully toward him. "This doesn't concern you." The man's voice remained calm. "It concerns anyone who just watched a woman get assaulted." The word assaulted hung heavy in the air. A murmur spread across the diner. Reeves stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate. "You don't know who you're talking to." The man didn't blink. "I know exactly who you are," he replied. There was no shouting, no shaking, just control. Reeves studied him now. "And who are you supposed to be?" The man paused for a moment. "My name's Ethan Cole." The name meant nothing to most people in the diner, but the way he stood, shoulders relaxed, feet grounded, eyes alert, spoke louder than any introduction. Reeves smirked. "Well, Ethan Cole, unless you're her lawyer, you better step aside." Ethan's eyes briefly flicked toward Tasha, who was still holding her cheek, tears rolling silently down her face. "She doesn't need a lawyer," Ethan said calmly. "She needs someone to stop you." A gasp came from the counter. Reeves's smile faded. "You're making a big mistake," the sheriff said quietly. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "No," he replied. "The mistake was thinking no one would say anything." Silence. The tension in the room felt like a wire pulled too tight. Reeves stepped even closer, invading Ethan's space. "I am the law in this town." Ethan's voice did not rise. "No," he said evenly. "You're a man hiding behind a badge." The words hit harder than a punch. Reeves's face flushed red. "You want to test that?" he snapped. Ethan's breathing remained slow and steady. "I've been tested before," he said quietly. There was something different about his tone now, something that made even the sheriff hesitate for half a second. Reeves shoved him suddenly. It was aggressive, forceful, but Ethan barely moved. His feet stayed planted like roots in the ground. Reeves blinked, surprised. "You done?" Ethan asked softly. That only made the sheriff angrier. Reeves swung a fist toward Ethan's face. The movement was fast, but Ethan was faster. In one smooth motion, Ethan stepped slightly to the side, blocked the punch with his forearm, and grabbed Reeves' wrist. The action was controlled, precise, almost effortless. Before anyone could process what was happening, Ethan twisted the sheriff's arm behind his back and guided him forward, face first onto a nearby table. Plates crashed to the floor, glass shattered. Reeves grunted in pain. The entire diner erupted in noise. "Oh my God," someone whispered. Tasha stared in disbelief. Ethan didn't slam him violently. He didn't shout. He simply applied enough pressure to stop him. "Relax," Ethan said quietly into his ear. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Let me go," Reeves shouted. "Not until you calm down." Reeves struggled, but every movement only tightened the hold slightly. Ethan's grip was firm, but measured, like someone trained to control without losing control. Carl stood frozen near the counter. Several customers now had their phones out, recording everything. Reeves's voice cracked with anger. "You have no idea what you're doing." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he said. "I spent 12 years defending this country. I didn't do that so men like you could abuse people at home." A ripple moved through the room. Reeves froze slightly. "Military?" he muttered. "Retired Navy SEAL," Ethan said plainly. The words hit differently. Even Reeves understood what that meant. Discipline, training, control. Ethan slowly eased the pressure, but kept Reeves pinned. "You picked on someone you thought was weaker," Ethan continued. "That's not strength, that's cowardice." Reeves's breathing was heavy now. "You're assaulting an officer," he spat. Ethan almost smiled. "No," he replied. "I stopped an assault." The diner grew quieter again, but this time it wasn't fear holding the silence. It was awareness. People were seeing something they had never seen before. Sheriff Reeves, powerless. Ethan carefully released him and stepped back immediately, giving space. Reeves straightened up, adjusting his uniform, trying to recover his authority. "You just ruined your life," he hissed. Ethan didn't flinch. "If standing up to bullying ruins my life, then it was worth it." Reeves looked around the diner, but the room felt different now. No one was looking down anymore. They were looking at him, watching, judging. Phones still recording. The power dynamic had shifted. Reeves's voice lost some of its edge. "This town answers to me." "Not today," Ethan replied. Tasha slowly lowered her hand from her cheek. Her breathing steadied. For the first time since the slap, she didn't feel alone. Reeves pointed a shaking finger at Ethan. "This isn't over." Ethan met his stare evenly. "No," he said softly. "It's just beginning." And in that moment, the entire diner understood something powerful. Fear only rules when no one challenges it. And someone finally had.
Sheriff Reeves straightened his uniform, but the confidence he once wore like armor was cracking. His breathing was uneven, his face red, his eyes darted around the diner, not with authority this time, but with uncertainty. For years, this room had belonged to him. Today, it didn't. "You're all going to regret this," he snapped, trying to regain control. But his voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. From the back corner, a shaky voice spoke up. "That was wrong, Sheriff." It was Mrs. Hernandez, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for apple pie. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. Reeves turned toward her. "Mind your business." "It became our business when you hit her," she replied softly. A murmur of agreement spread across the room. One of the truckers at the counter stood up. "We all saw it." Another customer lifted his phone slightly. "It's recorded." Reeves' jaw tightened. The same people who once looked down at their plates were now looking directly at him, not afraid, not silent. Tasha slowly stepped forward. Her cheek was still red, her eyes still wet, but something inside her had shifted. Her voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. "You don't get to treat me like I'm less," she said. The room fell quiet again. Reeves stared at her. For a moment, it looked like he might explode again, but this time he didn't raise his hand. Because he could feel it. The power had slipped. Ethan stood a few feet away, calm as ever. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't shouting, he was simply there. And sometimes, that's enough. Reeves looked at Ethan. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Ethan shook his head slightly. "No. He just knows the difference between authority and abuse." Those words settled deep in the room. Carl, the manager, finally stepped forward again. His hands were shaking, but he didn't step back this time. "Sheriff, you can't come in here and hit my employee," he said. Reeves glared at him. "You want trouble too?" Carl swallowed hard. "No," he replied, "but I don't want to stay quiet anymore." That sentence changed everything. Because courage is contagious. And silence breaks once one voice cracks it open. From the doorway, the faint sound of sirens began to rise. Reeves' head snapped toward the windows. "That better not be for me," he muttered. Ethan didn't say anything. He simply folded his arms calmly. Outside, 2 state police vehicles pulled into the parking lot. The room held its breath. The diner door opened. 2 uniformed state officers walked in, professional and composed. "Sheriff Dalton Reeves?" one of them asked. Reeves forced a smile. "What's this about?" "We received reports of an assault and multiple video recordings." Reeves' face drained of color. He glanced around the diner again. Phones still raised, eyes still steady. No one looking away. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. The officer remained calm. "Sir, we need you to come with us." "You're making a mistake," Reeves barked. "Sir," the second officer added, "please cooperate." The word cooperate sounded different now. Reeves had demanded it from others for years. Now it was being demanded from him. He looked at Ethan one last time. "This isn't over," he muttered. Ethan met his gaze without blinking. "For you, it is." The officers guided Reeves toward the door. For the first time in anyone's memory, the sheriff walked out of that diner without control. The bell above the door rang as it closed behind him. And then, silence. Not the fearful silence from earlier. A different silence. One filled with release. Tasha's legs felt weak. She grabbed the edge of a table to steady herself. Tears finally spilled freely down her cheeks, not just from pain, but from release. Ethan stepped closer, his voice gentle now. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly. I think so." "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "You don't thank someone for doing what's right," he said quietly. Carl approached them slowly. His eyes were full of regret. "I should have stepped in sooner," he admitted. Tasha looked at him, wiping her tears. "We all should," she said softly. The trucker at the counter spoke up. "I was scared." Mrs. Hernandez nodded. "We all were." Ethan looked around the diner. "Fear keeps bad people powerful," he said. "But fear only works when everyone stays silent." The words settled into every heart in that room. A young father near the back hugged his little daughter closer. A waitress from the kitchen stepped out and squeezed Tasha's hand. Something had changed in that diner. Not just the sheriff's position, the town's mindset. Outside, the state police vehicles drove away with Sheriff Reeves in the back seat. For years, people whispered about his behavior. Now they didn't have to whisper anymore, because truth had finally stepped into the light. Tasha took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Ethan picked up his jacket from the booth. "You're heading out?" Carl asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied softly. "You changed something today," Mrs. Hernandez said. Ethan paused at the door. "I didn't," he said. "You did, the moment you decided not to stay quiet." He opened the door. Golden sunset light poured into the diner, warm and bright. Before stepping outside, he turned back one last time. "Courage spreads," he said calmly. "All it takes is one person to stand up and one more to join them." Then he walked out. The bell above the door rang softly. Inside the diner, people began talking again. Not in whispers, but openly. Carl cleared his throat. "Coffee's on the house today," he said with a small smile. A light laugh moved through the room. Tasha walked toward the mirror behind the counter and looked at her reflection. The red mark on her cheek was still there. But behind it, her eyes were different. Stronger. And that day, the town learned something powerful. Badges don't make someone honorable. Power doesn't make someone right. And silence protects the wrong person. But when ordinary people choose courage over fear, everything changes.